The second she snatched my mother's worn apron off the hook, I knew tonight was not a family dinner. It was a hostile takeover inside the restaurant I had spent my youth building. As the cast iron skillet nearly cracked my shoulder, a calm voice from the doorway declared she had just touched the most critical evidence in the lawsuit. I turned to see my uncle, holding the one thing that could destroy my stepmother's entire plan. My name is Harper Ellison, and at 32 years old, I was the sole owner of Willow and Ember, a fine casual dining space in the heart of downtown Riverton. I had just wrapped up an exhausting but triumphant tasting session with my head chef, savoring the final notes of a new rosemary reduction sauce. When the intercom buzzed, it was not a delivery driver or a customer. It was the voice of my stepmother, Lana, dripping with a saccharine sweetness that usually preceded a disaster. She asked me to come to the back kitchen for a little surprise. My stomach tightened, the rosemary aftertaste turning bitter in my throat. I wiped my hands on a side towel, took a deep breath, and pushed through the swinging double doors. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air left my lungs as if I had been punched. Lana was standing by the stainless steel prep island, humming a tune I did not recognize, but that was not what froze my blood. It was what she was wearing, tied around her waist, contrasting sharply with her expensive designer blouse, was a faded blue floral apron. It was my mother's apron. It was the apron Rachel Ellison had worn every single day of my childhood. It was the apron she had been wearing the first time she taught me how to properly dice an onion without crying. After Mom died, that piece of fabric became holy to me. I had kept it in a locked cedar box inside my personal locker in the dry storage room. I had the only key, or so I thought. Lana turned around, smoothing the fabric over her hips as if she had worn it for years. She beamed at me, her smile wide and predatory. She told me I looked surprised and asked if I liked the touch. She said she thought wearing my mother's apron would be a beautiful way to honor the family history tonight, especially since we were celebrating the official launch of our joint venture. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, sharp and clear. I asked her how she got into my locker. I did not raise my voice, but the tremor was there, vibrating just beneath the surface. She waved her hand dismissively, laughing as if I were being a silly child. She said not to worry about the details, claiming she had asked the janitor to help her pop the lock because she knew I would want everything to be perfect for the family dinner. She gestured toward the viewing window that looked out into the main dining room. I walked over and looked through the glass. My knees nearly buckled. The main dining hall, which I had designed with minimalist lighting and exposed brick to create an intimate atmosphere, had been turned into a circus. A long banquet table stretched down the center of the room, cluttered with gaudy centerpieces that clashed with my decor. But the real horror was hanging above the hostess stand. A massive vinyl banner was draped across the entrance. It read, "Ellison Family Hospitality Group, Internal Launch Party." Below the text was the logo I had spent $3,000 commissioning from a graphic designer, the stylized willow tree and ember, except it had been altered. Clumsily photoshopped right next to the tree was the name Lana Ellison in a bold gold font that looked cheap and aggressive. I turned back to her, my voice dropping an octave. I told her to take that banner down immediately. I reminded her that Willow and Ember was not a family project. I stated clearly that it was owned solely by Summit Hearth Group LLC, a company that had exactly one name on the incorporation papers, and that name was Harper Ellison. Lana clicked her tongue, shaking her head as she began chopping carrots with a dangerous lack of rhythm. She told me to stop being so technical and ungrateful. She brought up the loan from 7 years ago, the one she had co-signed when I was 25 and desperate. She asked if I had forgotten who made this all possible. I stepped closer, maintaining my distance from the knife but closing the emotional gap. I reminded her that I had paid back that loan in full, with interest, 3 years ago. I reminded her that she had signed a release of liability and a termination of financial interest document in front of a notary. I told her she had zero equity in this building or this business. The back door slammed open, cutting off her retort. Ryan, my 24-year-old stepbrother, strode in. He looked like he owned the place, wearing a blazer over a t-shirt and carrying a roll of large architectural blueprints. He did not even greet me. He threw the blueprints onto the prep table, right next to where Lana was butchering the vegetables. He looked at me with a smirk that mirrored his mother's and said he had the mock-ups for the renovation. He unrolled the paper, weighing the corners down with a salt cellar and a pepper mill. The title block on the blueprints read, "The Ellison Family Bistro and Art Studio." Ryan pointed to the second floor of my restaurant, the area currently used for private wine tastings and storage. He explained that he was going to gut the upstairs for his photography studio. He said the lighting was perfect. Then he pointed to the main floor. He said Mom wanted to make the menu more approachable, more family style, so they were going to scrap the seasonal rotation and put in a permanent burger and pasta section. I stared at them. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a family reunion. They were not asking. They were informing. They genuinely believed they could bully me into submission because for 20 years, that is exactly how the dynamic had worked. But I was not 12 years old anymore, and I was not the 20-year-old who needed a cosigner. I grabbed the blueprints and rolled them back up, shoving them toward Ryan's chest. I told him to get his trash off my prep table. I told them both that the dinner was canceled and that they needed to leave my property before I called the police for trespassing. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted instantly from passive-aggressive to volatile. Lana dropped the knife. The clang of steel against the cutting board was loud in the sudden silence. Her face contorted, the mask of the benevolent mother slipping to reveal the fury underneath. She lunged forward and shoved me. It was a hard, physical push to my shoulder that sent me stumbling back a step. She screamed that I was an ungrateful brat. She shrieked that everything here belonged to her because without her signature, I would still be washing dishes in a diner. She lunged for the counter where I had set my phone down to record the audio of this conversation. She snatched my phone before I could react. She held it behind her back, her eyes wide and manic. She yelled that I was trying to entrap her. She screamed at Ryan to lock the back door. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind went ice cold. I knew exactly where the security cameras were. There was a dome camera right above the walk-in fridge and another by the expediting station. They covered the entire kitchen. I needed to keep my hands visible. I needed to not engage physically. I raised my hands, palms open. I told her to give me my phone back and leave. I kept my voice steady, projecting clearly so the microphones on the cameras would pick it up. Lana did not like the calm. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to scream back, to push her, to give her a reason to play the victim. When I refused to break, she escalated. She turned and grabbed the nearest heavy object. It was a 12-inch Lodge cast iron skillet, heavy and black, sitting on the drying rack. She gripped the handle, her knuckles turning white. She screamed that this was her kitchen. She yelled that she was the mother of this family and she would not be disrespected by the daughter of a woman who could not even stay alive to raise me. The insult to my mother hit me harder than the shove, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I did not move. Ryan was shouting now too, trying to create a narrative for the witnesses outside in the dining room who could surely hear the commotion. He was yelling for me to stop hitting his mother, screaming for help, even though I had not moved an inch from my defensive stance. They were staging a scene. They were going to frame me for assault in my own restaurant. Lana took a step toward me, raising the cast iron skillet. It was not a gesture of warning. She was going to swing. She was actually going to hit me with 5 pounds of iron. I braced myself, shifting my weight to dodge. My eyes locked on the heavy black metal hovering above her shoulder. The blue floral ties of my mother's apron fluttered as she tensed her arm. Just as her arm muscles contracted to bring the skillet down, the heavy steel security door at the back of the kitchen burst open. It did not open tentatively. It was thrown wide with authoritative force. A man stepped in. He was in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal wool coat over a crisp button-down shirt. The cold wind from the alley followed him in, swirling the steam from the dish pit. His voice was deep, resonant, and cut through the screaming like a knife. He said he thought they should stop right there before they turned this entire incident into Exhibit A for the prosecution. Lana froze. The skillet hovered in midair. Ryan stopped his fake shouting, his mouth hanging open. I turned my head. Standing there, shaking the rain off an umbrella, was my Uncle Mark, my mother's brother, the man the Ellison family had written off years ago, the man Lana thought was a harmless drunk who stayed out of family affairs. But the man standing in my doorway did not look harmless. He looked like an executioner, and in his hand, he was holding a thick manila envelope that looked terrifyingly official. He looked straight at Lana, his eyes dropping to the cast-iron skillet still raised in her hand, and then to the apron tied around her waist. He spoke again, his voice dangerously low. He told her she had just touched the most critical evidence in the lawsuit. Lana lowered the skillet slowly, her face draining of color. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The dinner was over. The war had just begun. That blue floral pattern was not just fabric to me, it was the topography of my entire childhood. Seeing it tied around Lana's waist was a violation that felt more intimate and grotesque than if she had slapped me. My mother, Rachel, had been a woman who spoke in flavors. She was not loud, and she did not take up much space in a room, but put her in front of a stove, and she became a conductor. The apron was her uniform. It smelled permanently of vanilla extract, yeast, and the specific, sharp scent of lemon zest. I remembered being 7 years old, standing on a step stool because I was too short to reach the counter, watching her hands work dough. She never measured anything. She told me that the flour would tell you when it had enough water, that you just had to listen with your fingers. That kitchen was a sanctuary. It was safe, it was warm, and it was ours. When Mom died of ovarian cancer shortly after my 21st birthday, the house went cold. The silence was deafening. I packed my life into cardboard boxes to move into a cramped studio apartment in the city, desperate to get away from the ghost of the life we had lost. I left the furniture, I left the expensive china, I left the jewelry. The only thing I took from that kitchen was the blue floral apron. I folded it into a tight square and placed it in my suitcase like a holy relic. It was the seed. It was the promise that one day I would build a place that smelled just like her kitchen. My father did not wait long to fill the silence. He married Lana 11 months after the funeral. In the beginning, Lana played the role of the grieving healer perfectly. She moved in with her 2 children, Ryan and Emily, and filled the house with noise and new furniture. She hugged me a little too tight and told me constantly that she wanted to love me like her own flesh and blood. She said we were a blended family now, a fresh start. But the blend was never equal. It was oil and water. There were never any raised hands or locked closets. Lana was too smart for physical abuse. Her cruelty was surgical. It was in the way she reorganized the household so that Ryan, who was 12 then, got the master guest suite for his gaming setup, while my old room was turned into a sewing room for her, forcing me to sleep on the pull-out couch whenever I visited from college. It was in the way family vacations were planned. They went to Hawaii for 2 weeks, but Lana would call me with a frantic, apologetic voice to say that tickets were just so expensive this year, and surely I would not mind staying behind to house sit and take care of their 3 dogs. I became the unpaid help. I was the built-in babysitter, the dog walker, the house cleaner, all while Lana praised herself to the neighbors for being such a saintly stepmother who kept a roof over the head of her husband's daughter. She rewrote our history in real time, at family gatherings, with a glass of Chardonnay in hand. She would sigh and tell my aunts that it was a miracle the house was still standing. She would say that before she arrived. The poor Ellison family was helpless. She claimed I could not boil an egg without setting off the smoke alarm. She told stories about how she had to teach me basic hygiene and nutrition. I would sit there, biting my tongue until it bled, thinking of the nights my mother and I made bœuf bourguignon from scratch, letting Lana's lies wash over me because my father just sat there and nodded, too broken or too cowardly to correct her. When I announced I wanted to go to culinary school, Lana shut it down immediately. We were sitting at the dining table, and she laughed. It was a dry, pitying sound. She told me that the restaurant business was for dreamers who liked to go bankrupt. She said it was too risky, too unstable, and quite frankly, beneath us. She looked at my father and told him that what I needed was a solid, dependable career. She pushed me into accounting. She said that if I became a CPA, I could handle the books for Ryan and Emily when they started their businesses one day. That was her vision of my future. I was to be the support staff for her children's success. I did not fight them. I could not afford to. My father was paying my tuition, and the condition was that I study business. So I did. I went to classes during the day, learning about tax codes and ledgers, but at night, I lived my real life. I got a job as a dishwasher at a 24-hour diner near campus. I worked my way up to prep cook, then line cook. I spent 4 years burning my arms on grease traps and slicing my fingers on dull knives. Learning the chaotic, beautiful rhythm of a commercial kitchen, I saved every single dime I made. I lived on ramen and shift meals. I wore thrift store clothes. While Ryan was driving a new sedan Lana bought him for his 16th birthday, and Emily was taking private tennis lessons, I was sweating over a flat-top grill at 3 a.m, putting away dollar after dollar for the dream. By the time I was 25, I had a business plan for a small pop-up catering company, the precursor to Willow and Ember. I had saved $20,000, but I needed $35,000 to secure the lease on a commercial prep kitchen and buy the initial inventory. I went to 3 banks. They all laughed at me. I was young. I had student loans, and the restaurant industry was considered high risk. I was devastated. I was so close I could taste it. That was when Lana stepped in. She found me crying in my old backyard during a 4th of July barbecue. She sat down next to me, handing me a tissue, and asked what was wrong. In a moment of weakness, I told her. Her eyes lit up. It was not a look of sympathy. It was the look of a predator spotting a wounded animal. She told me that families help families. She said she had a little money set aside from an inheritance, and she would co-sign a small personal loan for me. She made it sound like a divine intervention. She emphasized, over and over, that this was family capital. She said we were investing in me because they believed in me, despite her earlier comments about my cooking. I was desperate. I accepted. She co-signed a loan for $15,000. It was not a gift. It was a loan with an interest rate, and she made me sign a document she had typed up herself, stating that she was providing seed capital. I took that money and I worked like a woman possessed. I did not sleep for 3 years. I catered weddings, funerals, corporate lunches, and birthday parties. I cooked, I cleaned, I did the marketing, and yes, I did the accounting. Every profit margin was calculated down to the penny. When Willow and Ember finally transitioned from a catering company to a brick-and-mortar location, I was ready. The first thing I did with my first year of solid profits was write a check to Lana. I paid her back the $15,000 principal. I added $2,000 in interest, calculating it at a higher rate than the bank would have charged, just to be safe. I walked into her living room, placed the cashier's check on the coffee table, and handed her a formal document prepared by a notary. It was a release of interest form. It stated clearly that the debt was paid in full and that Lana Ellison held no equity, no ownership, and no future claim to the business known as Summit Hearth Group, LLC, or its subsidiaries. She had laughed as she signed it. She barely glanced at the paper. She just waved her hand and said that family did not need paperwork, but if it made me feel better, she would humor me. She told me I was so stiff, so serious, just like my father. I filed that document with the state. I put the original in my fireproof safe. I thought I had bought my freedom. I thought I had severed the cord that allowed her to pull me back into her shadow. I was naive. I thought the law was a shield. I did not realize that to a woman like Lana, facts were just raw ingredients that could be chopped up, boiled down, and seasoned until they tasted like whatever truth she wanted to serve. Standing in my kitchen now, watching her wear my dead mother's apron as if it were a costume for her play, I realized that the check I wrote 7 years ago had not bought me freedom. It had only bought me time. She had never intended to let me go. She was just waiting until the harvest was big enough to be worth stealing, and she had brought my Uncle Mark into the room, or so she thought, to watch the slaughter. She did not know that the apron she was defiling was not just a piece of cloth. It was the flag of a nation she had invaded but could never conquer. And she certainly did not know that the man standing in the doorway knew exactly who had really taught me how to cook. The formation of Summit Hearth Group LLC was not a moment of fanfare or confetti. It happened at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. Sitting at my wobbly kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee and a laptop screen that blurred before my tired eyes. I remember typing in the registration details, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit submit. It was the legal vessel for my survival. Willow and Ember was the soul, but Summit Hearth was the armor. I had found the location 3 months prior. It was a derelict warehouse on the edge of Riverton's downtown district, a place that used to store textiles before the industry moved overseas. The windows were shattered. The floor was stained with decades of industrial grease, and the roof leaked in 3 places. But the brickwork, the original, hand-laid red brick from the turn of the century, was magnificent. I saw the potential immediately. I saw a long, communal chef's table made of reclaimed oak. I saw pendant lights hanging from the high rafters. I saw a kitchen that breathed. To secure the building, I drained my savings account down to double digits. I did not go to a bank this time. I went to my peers. I pitched my concept to a college friend who had made a killing in tech, and another who had inherited a small windfall. I offered them silent equity, strictly financial, with a buyout clause triggerable after 5 years. They wrote checks for $20,000 and $15,000 respectively. It was not a fortune, but combined with my own $50,000 of saved catering profits, it was enough to sign the lease and start the demolition. The renovation took 6 months of 18-hour days. I learned how to sand floors. I learned how to negotiate with contractors who tried to overcharge me because I was a woman. I learned that up to code is a fluid concept depending on which city inspector shows up that day. But when we finally opened the doors, the space was exactly what I had dreamed of. It was warm, with amber lighting and the smell of wood smoke and roasting garlic permeating the air. My father and Lana attended the soft opening. I remember the night vividly because I was running on adrenaline and 3 hours of sleep. I had just seated a table of 4 when they walked in. Lana was wearing a fur stole that was entirely too heavy for the season, scanning the room not like a guest, but like an auditor. They sat at the best table in the house, one I had reserved specifically for them despite the wait list. I brought out the appetizers myself. A platter of charred octopus with romesco sauce and crispy potatoes. Lana looked around, sipping the complimentary champagne I had sent over. She nodded, a tight, approving gesture that felt more like a pat on the head than a salute. She told me it was impressive, really. She leaned in, lowering her voice so the neighboring table would not hear, and said that it was a good thing her credit score was so impeccable back then. She said that without that signature of hers on the original loan, I never would have built the credit history to get the suppliers to trust me now. She called it our little stepping stone. My father just chewed his octopus and agreed, saying that Lana had always had a good head for potential. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I swallowed it. I was a professional. I smiled, thanked them for coming, and went back to the kitchen to scream silently into the walk-in freezer. The next day, I had my lawyer draft the documents. I was not taking any chances. I sent a certified letter to their house. Inside was a cashier's check for the final interest payment on that old personal loan, along with a formal termination of financial interest agreement. It was redundant, strictly speaking, since the original loan was paid, but I wanted a paper trail that was visible from space. Lana signed it. She sent it back with a sticky note attached to the front page. In her looping, cursive handwriting, she had written, "So formal, paper is just paper. Harper, family is family. We are just glad to help." I filed the document away, thinking that was the end of it. I did not realize then that to Lana, a contract was just a suggestion, and boundaries were challenges to be overcome. Willow and Ember took off. It was not an overnight explosion, but a steady, roaring burn. The local food bloggers fell in love with the narrative. They loved the farm-to-table ethos, but more than that, they loved the story I told through the menu. I did not hide my inspiration. I openly credited my mother. Rachel, the slow-braised short ribs were her Sunday recipe, elevated with a red wine reduction. The lemon tart was exactly how she made it, with just a hint of thyme in the crust. We became the spot in Riverton for milestones. We hosted engagement parties, 50th anniversaries, and corporate mergers. I was working 80 hours a week, but I owned every second of it. I bought out my investors in year 3, 2 years ahead of schedule. I renegotiated the lease with an option to buy the building, which I exercised 6 months later. By the time I was 32, I owned the dirt, the bricks, the brand, and the debt. It was mine. And in the center of it all, hidden away like a beating heart, was the apron. I had bought a custom-made box for it, crafted from cedar wood to keep the moths away. I folded the blue floral fabric gently, wrapping it in acid-free tissue paper. I placed the box on the top shelf of the secure storage locker in the dry goods room. That locker was where I kept the liquor license, the deed to the building, and the employee files. It was the nerve center of the business. I never wore the apron. I was terrified of staining it, of tearing it, of subjecting it to the grease and fire of a commercial kitchen. It was too precious. Sometimes, after a particularly brutal shift, when the last customer had left and the porters were mopping the floors, I would go into the storage room. I would unlock the box, open the lid, and just look at it. I would touch the fabric with clean fingertips, remembering the way it looked on Mom's waist. It was my grounding wire. It was the line that separated Harper the businesswoman from Harper the grieving daughter. But success is a beacon, and beacons attract everything: ships, storms, and predators. About 2 years into our major success, the whispers started. It began innocuously enough. An aunt on my father's side, Aunt Sarah, called me to make a reservation. We chatted for a moment, and she mentioned how proud the whole family was. Then she said something that made me pause. She said it was so sweet of me to use Lana's family recipes for the winter menu. I froze. I asked her what she was talking about. Sarah laughed, oblivious. She said Lana had told them at Thanksgiving, which I had missed because I was working, that she had spent weeks consulting with me on the flavor profiles for the new squash soup. She said Lana had mentioned providing the seed money to get the new kitchen equipment installed. I corrected her. I was polite but firm. I told her the squash soup was my own creation, developed with my sous chef, and that the equipment was purchased with profits from the business. Sarah went quiet, sounding confused, and then quickly changed the subject, clearly uncomfortable with the friction. I brushed it off as Lana just needing attention. I thought it was pathetic, really, a woman claiming credit for soup. But it didn't stop there. A regular customer, a woman who attended the same church as Lana, stopped me one night at the bar. She squeezed my hand and said my stepmother was such a prayer warrior for my business. She told me Lana had asked the entire congregation to pray for our family restaurant during the expansion, framing it as a burden she was helping to shoulder. The phrase, "our family restaurant," made my skin crawl. Willow and Ember was not a family restaurant. It was a sole proprietorship. I started noticing Lana and my father coming in more often. They would bring friends. Lana would wave at the staff as if she knew them personally. She would walk through the dining room with a proprietary air, adjusting a napkin here, moving a candle there. I told my staff to be polite but to treat her like any other customer. I did not want to cause a scene in my own lobby. I was trying to be the bigger person. I was trying to rise above the petty grievances of a blended family. I thought that as long as my name was on the deed and the bank accounts, her delusions did not matter. Then came the article in Riverton Palette. It was a glossy lifestyle magazine, the kind that sat on coffee tables in the wealthy suburbs. They had requested an interview with me, but I had been too busy with the holiday rush to schedule it, so I had declined. I assumed they would just run a review. I was drinking my morning espresso, standing at the pass, when my general manager dropped the magazine on the counter. She looked uneasy. She told me I needed to read page 34. The headline read, "The Hearth of Riverton, How the Ellison Family Brought Soul Back to Downtown." My stomach dropped. I scanned the text. The writer had not interviewed me, but they had reached out to sources close to the establishment. There, in the second paragraph, was a quote. "It really is a labor of love," says Ryan Ellison, brother of owner Harper Ellison and creative consultant for the brand. "My mother, Lana, has been the spiritual co-founder since day one. She recognized Harper's talent when no one else did and provided the financial and emotional foundation to build Willow and Ember. It's not just a business. It's a legacy we are building together." I stared at the words, spiritual co-founder, creative consultant. It was a lie so bold, so public, that it felt like a physical assault. They were not just gossiping at church anymore. They were planting flags. They were creating a public record. To the thousands of people reading this magazine, Lana was not the wicked stepmother. She was the benevolent matriarch behind the success. I realized then that the line I had drawn in the sand, the line of legal ownership, was being erased by the tide of their narrative. They were not trying to steal the money yet. They were stealing the story. And once they owned the story, they would come for the rest. I crumpled the magazine in my fist, the glossy paper cracking loud in the quiet kitchen. I knew I had to call my lawyer, but before I could even pick up the phone, the notification for the family dinner popped up on my screen, followed by the text from Lana about the venue. The trap was not just being set. It had been armed for years, and I had been too busy cooking to notice the knife at my back. The vibration of my phone against the stainless steel countertop was the first tremor of the coming earthquake, though I did not know it at the time. I was in the middle of reviewing the inventory list for the weekend service when the screen lit up with a notification from the Ellison Family Connect group chat. It was a message from Lana. She wrote that she had a wonderful idea. She proposed that we host a grand Ellison family reunion this coming Saturday night at Willow and Ember. She said it was time for the whole extended family, including the cousins from upstate and the aunts I had not seen in a decade, to come together and celebrate our collective success. Then came the kicker, typed out with a winking emoji. She added that since it was family, she assumed the venue rental fee would be waived, as it was silly to charge ourselves for using our own dining room. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on my pen. The audacity was breathtaking. Saturday night was our peak revenue window. Waiving the rental fee and shutting down the main dining room for a private party of 30 people would cost me thousands of dollars in lost turnover, not to mention the tips my staff relied on. I began typing a refusal. I was going to say that Saturday was fully booked and that a buyout required a deposit and a contract, family or not. Before I could hit send, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was tired, the voice of a man who had spent years walking on eggshells. He begged me to just say yes. He told me that Lana had been feeling insecure lately, that she felt I was pushing her away after I paid off the loan. He said she just wanted to show off my success to the family because she was proud of me. He asked me to do it as a favor to him. He said it would be a night of healing. I hesitated. The guilt trip was my father's only weapon, but he wielded it with expert precision. While I was listening to him breathe on the other end of the line, another notification popped up. It was from Ryan. He had sent an image to the group chat. It was a mock-up of a logo. He had taken the Willow and Ember file, which I knew he must have ripped from my website, and superimposed it over a new background. The text below the tree did not say fine casual dining. It read, Ellison Family Hospitality Group. Underneath the image, Ryan had typed, just playing around with some branding ideas for the future. LOL. Looking forward to Saturday. The LOL did nothing to soften the blow. My stomach turned over. This was not a dinner request. This felt like a soft launch. I told my father I would think about it and hung up. I sat there in the quiet of the office, the hum of the refrigerator compressors the only sound, feeling a creeping sense of paranoia that I told myself was irrational. Then came the text from Uncle Mark. I had not spoken to Mark in 6 months. He lived 2 states away and generally kept his distance from the Ellison circus. His message was short and devoid of pleasantries. Harper, I need you to check something for me. Did you ever sign a document specifically listing Lana as a managing member or operating partner back when she gave you that loan? I frowned, typing back immediately. I told him no. I told him she was just a guarantor on the loan and that I had paid her back and she had signed a release. Mark's reply came 3 minutes later. It was cryptic. Check your files. Not the release forms. The original operating agreement. I was at a barbecue last week with your cousin David. And your dad was there. He had a few too many beers. He was bragging about how smart Lana was for including a temporary management clause that never expires until a board vote. Harper, you don't have a board? My heart started to hammer against my ribs. A board vote? I was a single-member LLC. There was no board. I scrambled to the large filing cabinet in the corner of the office. I yanked open the drawer labeled Legal Formation. I flipped through the hanging folders, my fingers dry and fumbling. I found the articles of organization. I found the bank loan documents. I found the lease. But I could not find the original, signed copy of the internal operating agreement from 7 years ago. I had a digital draft on my computer, but the physical copy with the wet signatures was missing from the folder. I closed my eyes, thinking back. 7 years ago, I was 25. I was cooking, cleaning, and doing the books. Lana had offered to help organize the paperwork during the chaotic first month of opening the original catering kitchen. She had kept a set of files at their house for safekeeping because my apartment was in a bad neighborhood at the time. I realized with a jolt of nausea that the original documents, the ones that defined the legal structure of my company at its inception, were likely sitting in a safe in my father's study, a safe that Lana had the combination to. I needed to know what was happening in my restaurant when I was not there. I called Ben, my head bartender and one of my most loyal employees. He had been with me since the catering days. I asked him if he had seen Lana around lately. Ben hesitated. He said he did not want to cause drama. But yes, she had been coming in during the Tuesday and Wednesday morning shifts, usually when I was at the market or meeting with suppliers. I asked him what she did. He said she walked around like she was inspecting the place. He told me that last week. She had brought a tape measure, but the weirdest thing, he said, was that she had asked him to open the office because she needed to check the insurance policy. Ben had refused, telling her only I had the key, and she had gotten snappy with him. She had told him, "I am the reason you have a job, young man." I thanked Ben and hung up, my hands shaking. She was not just visiting, she was auditing. I pulled up the security camera logs on my laptop. I had a cloud-based system that stored footage for 30 days. I scrolled back to last Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. There she was. Lana walked into the main dining room. The restaurant was closed to the public at that hour, but the cleaning crew let her in because they recognized her as my stepmother. She was not alone. Walking beside her was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and carrying a leather portfolio. I watched on the grainy screen as they moved through the space. The man was not looking at the menu or the decor. He was looking at the structure. He pointed to the HVAC vents. He took notes on the number of tables. He walked behind the bar and looked at the inventory of high-end scotches. It looked exactly like an appraisal. I took a screenshot of the man's face and ran a reverse image search, but it was too blurry. However, the way he moved, the way he took notes, it screamed accountant or valuator. My phone pinged again. It was Uncle Mark. He had sent an image file. It was a photo of a document, taken in bad lighting, probably with a phone under a table. I got David to send me this. He took a picture of it when Lana was showing it off at Thanksgiving last year. Look at Article 4. I zoomed in on the photo. It was a page from an operating agreement. It looked like my operating agreement. And there, in a paragraph I must have skimmed over in my youth and desperation, was a clause. In the event of financial distress or during the initial 10-year stabilization period, the guarantor, Lana Ellison, shall retain the designation of temporary managing member with full voting rights on asset disposition, until such time as a unanimous vote of all family members dissolves said status. 10 years, it had been 7, and unanimous vote of all family members? That was not legal boilerplate. That was a trap. That was a sentence designed by someone who intended to never let go. If that document was considered valid by a court, Lana technically had a say in how I ran my business. She could argue that she had voting rights. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. They were not just trying to take credit, they were building a case to seize control. The family dinner was not a celebration, it was a board meeting. They were going to walk in, surround me with family members who had been fed lies, and force a vote or a confrontation to make me acknowledge her status. I opened the reservation system again. I looked at the booking for Saturday night. It had been entered by my new hostess, who must have taken the call from Lana. The reservation name was not Ellison Family Dinner. It was listed as Ellison Legacy Event, Introduction of Partners. Introduction of Partners. The pieces snapped together, the banner Ryan was designing, the article in the magazine, the audit by the man in the gray suit, the clause in the old contract. They were going to announce to the extended family, and probably post it all over social media in real time, that Willow and Ember was officially becoming a family partnership. They were going to corner me in public, use the pressure of the family audience to make me smile and nod, and then use that acquiescence as proof that I accepted the arrangement. They were staging a coup. I stared at the screen. My instinct was to cancel the reservation, to bar the doors, to call a lawyer and issue a restraining order. But then I looked at the photo of the document Mark had sent. If I canceled, they would just do this somewhere else. They would spin the story that I was unstable, that I was ungrateful, that I was locking them out of their investment. They would sue me, and they would use that clause to freeze my assets while the courts took years to decide. No, I could not run. I had to kill this infection at the source. I needed them to show their hand. I needed them to admit, on record, what they were doing. I needed them to think they had won, right up until the moment they lost everything. I picked up my phone and typed a message to the family group chat. Saturday sounds perfect. The rental fee is waived. I will prepare a special menu. Let's make it a night to remember. I watched the scene receipts pop up. Lana liked the message. Ryan sent a thumbs up. Then I opened my private chat with Uncle Mark. I am letting them come. I am going to trap them. Mark's response came instantly. Good girl. I am flying in on Friday. I will stay at a motel outside of town. If you want, I will be there on Saturday night. I will come in through the back. Do not tell a soul I'm coming, not even your staff. I need to be the ghost they don't believe in until it is too late. I agreed. I set the phone down. The kitchen was quiet, but inside my head, the noise was deafening. I looked at the security monitor, at the empty dining room that I had built with my own sweat and blood. Let them come. Let them bring their banners and their fake contracts and their stolen valor. They thought they were walking into a victory party. They had no idea they were walking into a crime scene. And for the first time in my life, I was not going to be the victim. I was going to be the witness, the judge, and the jury. Saturday night arrived with the heaviness of a storm front. I parked my car in the back alley, taking a moment to breathe in the cool, damp air before facing the firing squad. I had told my staff to treat this like a VIP buyout, but as I walked through the service corridor and pushed open the doors to the main dining room, I realized I had underestimated the scale of the ambush. I stopped dead at the hostess stand. The space I had designed to be understated and elegant, all warm wood tones and soft amber lighting, had been rebranded. Hanging across the main archway, obscuring the view of the open kitchen, was a massive vinyl banner. It did not say "Welcome Family." It read, "Ellison Family Estate and Hospitality Dinner." It looked less like a reunion and more like a shareholder meeting for a conglomerate that did not exist. The room was full. 30 people. A mix of my father's siblings, Lana's extensive network of cousins, and a few bewildered second cousins I barely recognized, were mingling with glasses of my most expensive reserve wine. Lana stood in the center of the room, positioned perfectly under the main chandelier. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that looked suspiciously bridal. She held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand and was gesturing expansively with the other. I moved closer, staying in the shadows of the coat check. listening. She was telling Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bob that this restaurant was the culmination of a decade of family sacrifice. She used words like, "we built," "our vision," and "joint effort." She did not mention Summit Hearth Group. She did not mention the 80-hour weeks I worked alone. She spoke as if she had been laying bricks alongside me. She said that when she first saw this old warehouse, she just knew that with a little bit of family capital and a lot of prayer, they could turn it into the legacy standing before them today. My father was standing next to her, nodding like a bobblehead, a frozen smile plastered on his face. He looked terrified. Then the lights dimmed. A projector screen, which Ryan must have set up while I was in the office earlier that day, descended from the ceiling near the bar. Ryan stepped up to a microphone he had rigged to the house sound system. He tapped it twice, the feedback screeching through the room, making everyone wince. He laughed, apologized, and said he was better with visual arts than audio. He clicked a remote. A slide appeared on the screen. It was a floor plan of Willow and Ember, but it was color-coded in a way that made my blood run cold. The main dining floor was labeled the Ellison Family Bistro. The second floor, my private event space, was labeled Ryan Ellison Creative Studios and Media Center. But the part that made me physically nauseous was the label over the back of the house, over the area marking the dry storage room and the chef's office. Ryan had typed, "The Rachel Legacy Archive, administered by Lana Ellison." He explained to the room that while the business was modern, they wanted to honor the past. He said that Mom's memory was so precious that Lana had graciously volunteered to be the custodian of her recipes and keepsakes, keeping them safe in the back office so that I could focus on the cooking part. A murmur of approval went through the room. "How sweet," someone whispered. "Lana is such a saint to care for the first wife's things." I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Uncle Mark, who I knew was hiding somewhere near the back entrance. "Do not lose your temper yet. Let them dig the hole deeper." I stayed quiet, my fingernails digging into my palms. Lana stepped back to the microphone. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a stack of documents bound in blue legal covers. She cleared her throat and said that in the spirit of this new chapter, she had prepared what she called a living will of the heart. She explained that to ensure this beautiful business remained a sanctuary for the whole family, she wanted everyone to sign a pledge. She said it was just a symbolic gesture to promise that they would always support each other and that the assets of the family would always be used to help family members in need. She signaled to the waiter, my waiter, who looked incredibly uncomfortable, to start passing out the folders. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked straight into the center of the room. The chatter died down instantly. All eyes turned to me. I did not smile. I did not take a glass of champagne. I stood in front of the projector screen, blocking Ryan's ridiculous floor plan with my body. I spoke clearly. I welcomed everyone to Willow and Ember. I told them I was happy to feed them and host them, but I said there seemed to be a misunderstanding about the nature of the evening. I pointed to the documents Lana was distributing. I told them that Willow and Ember was owned 100% by Summit Hearth Group, LLC. I stated that there were no other shareholders, no silent partners, and no family estate involved in the legal structure of the business. I told them that I would not be signing any living will, and I advised them that the document they were holding had no legal standing regarding my company. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the wine fridge from the bar. Aunt Sarah looked from me to Lana, confusion written all over her face. She asked, tentatively, if we were not partners. She said Lana had told them she put up the money for the renovation. Lana let out a sharp, wounded sound. It was a masterclass in acting. She dropped her hand to her chest, her eyes filling with instant tears. She looked at the crowd, then at me. She said she could not believe I would do this in front of everyone. She said she had put her own credit on the line, risked her own financial future to co-sign the loan that started this whole dream. And now that I was successful, I was trying to erase her. She said I was trying to kick the ladder down now that I had climbed up. She turned to my father. She asked him if he was going to let his daughter humiliate her like this after everything she had done for us. My father looked at his shoes. He mumbled that maybe we should discuss this in private. Lana shook her head violently. She said no. She said the truth needed to be known. She claimed that technically the paperwork might be in my name, but morally and spiritually. This was a 50-50 partnership, and she had the emails and the witnesses to prove it. She glanced at Ryan. He nodded, a subtle, almost imperceptible signal. I knew I needed to end this. I needed the hard evidence. I had the release forms, the bank statements, and the title deeds in the safe in my office. I needed to bring them out and physically show Aunt Sarah and the rest of them that Lana was lying. I told them to excuse me for a moment. I said I was going to get the file that proved I had paid back every cent Lana ever lent me, with interest, 5 years ago. I turned and walked briskly toward the kitchen double doors. The whispers erupted behind me, a cacophony of judgment and confusion. I pushed into the kitchen. It was empty. I had given the staff a 10-minute break before the main service, wanting to spare them the family drama. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I went straight to the dry storage room at the back. I keyed in the code for the electronic lock. It beeped green. I stepped inside and froze. The large metal shelving unit where I kept the safe was there. The safe was locked, but on the shelf above it, where I kept the custom cedar box, there was a gap. The box was there, but the lid was thrown open. I reached up and pulled the box down. It was empty. The tissue paper was torn and scattered. My mother's blue floral apron was gone. A cold dread washed over me. It was not just theft. It was a message. I heard the swing door of the kitchen open behind me. I turned around, clutching the empty box. Lana was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. She was no longer wearing the cream jacket she had on in the dining room. Over her silk dress, tied tightly at the waist, was the blue floral apron. It looked wrong on her. It looked grotesque, the faded blue cotton, stained with the ghost of my mother's flower and vanilla, clashed violently with her diamond necklace. She was smiling. It was not the sweet smile she used for my father. It was a cold, triumphant smirk. She walked toward me, running her hands over the fabric. She whispered that I should not look so shocked. She said that since I was so keen on legal ownership, she thought she should remind me who actually controlled the narrative in this family. She stopped 2 feet away from me. Her voice dropped so low it was barely a breath. She said that if I did not go back out there, apologize, and sign that document acknowledging the family partnership, the court of public opinion would hear a very different story. She said they would hear how I abused her. She said they would hear how I attacked her when she just tried to help. She reached out and picked up the heavy cast iron skillet from the drying rack. She weighed it in her hand, looking at me with eyes that were dead and flat. She told me that tonight, everyone was going to see exactly what kind of daughter I really was. I realized then that this was not just about money. She wanted to provoke me. She wanted me to lunge at her. She wanted a mark, a bruise, a scream, anything she could use to paint me as the unstable, violent aggressor. I looked at the apron, I looked at the skillet, and then I looked up at the corner of the ceiling, where the red light of the security camera blinked steadily in the silence. "You have no idea what you just started," I said, my voice steady. Lana just laughed and raised the pan. The grip Lana had on my arm was not the tentative hold of a family member trying to have a private conversation. It was a vice. She dug her manicured nails into the tender flesh of my upper arm, dragging me away from the door and toward the triple basin sink in the center of the prep area. I knew exactly what she was doing. I had installed the security system myself. The wide-angle lens mounted above the walk-in cooler had a perfect view of the center aisle. By pulling me into that specific spot, she was positioning us center stage. She was framing the shot. She spun me around, her face contorted into a mask of terrified victimhood that did not match the steel in her eyes. She began to scream, but the words were calculated. She yelled for me to stop hurting her. She shrieked that she only wanted to help. I planted my feet, forcing my body to go rigid. I knew that any sudden movement, any attempt to pull away too violently, would look like aggression on the grainy footage. I kept my hands open, palms facing outward, visible at chest height. I spoke clearly and calmly, pitching my voice to be picked up by the audio sensors. I stated that I was not touching her. I asked her to release my arm. I told her that she was currently trespassing in a restricted employee zone. But Lana was not listening to me. She was performing for the lens and for the audience she knew was gathering just beyond the swing doors. Then the doors burst open. Ryan stormed in. He did not look confused. He looked like he had been waiting in the wings for his cue. He rushed toward us, his face flushed with a theatrically induced rage. He shouted that I was always doing this. He yelled that I was jealous because Mom, meaning Lana, was the only reason I had a career. He screamed that without her money and her guidance, I would still be flipping burgers. The air in the kitchen grew heavy and suffocating. The industrial dish machine hummed in the corner, and the heat from the pilot lights on the 6-burner range radiated against my back. It felt less like a kitchen and more like a pressure cooker that was about to blow the lid off. Lana used Ryan's entrance as a distraction. She shoved me. It was a sharp, violent push against my chest. My rubber-soled shoes screeched against the quarry tile floor as I stumbled backward. I hit the edge of a stainless steel work table, the metal digging into my lower back. Lana lunged forward, not to hit me yet, but to grab. She snatched the phone from my pocket before I could secure it. She threw it across the room. It skittered across the floor and slid under the lowboy fridge. She pointed a shaking finger in my face, invading my personal space until I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. She screamed that I was ungrateful. She yelled that I was mentally unstable, just like my mother was at the end. That low blow was designed to make me snap. She wanted me to hit her. She needed me to throw the first punch so she could claim self-defense for whatever she planned to do next. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. I did not swing. I looked past her shoulder, directly at the camera lens, and maintained my defensive posture. Lana realized I was not breaking. The frustration cracked her facade. She needed a weapon. She needed to escalate the danger to justify her narrative. She turned and grabbed the handle of the large cast-iron skillet sitting on the drying rack. It was a 12-inch pan, heavy enough to crush bone. She raised it. She did not raise it like a cook moving a pan. She raised it like a club. She began to back away, feigning terror, screaming at the top of her lungs that I was attacking her with a knife. There was no knife. My hands were empty, but the people outside could not see my hands. They could only hear the screaming. I took a step back, my heel catching on a 50-pound bag of onions I had left by the prep station. I stumbled, my balance wavering. Lana saw the opening. She stepped forward, swinging the heavy iron pan in a menacing arc, cutting off my exit route. Through the small porthole windows of the kitchen doors, I saw faces: Aunt Sarah, Uncle Bob, my father. They were pushing against the glass, their faces pale with shock. They started to push the doors open. Lana whipped her head around and shrieked at them. She yelled for them to stay back. She screamed that I had lost control and was dangerous. She was sealing the room. She wanted witnesses to the aftermath, not the event. She wanted them to find her bruised and weeping, with me standing over her, so she could tell them I had gone mad. I regained my footing. I knew I could not let her hit me with that pan. If that iron struck my head, I would not be awake to defend myself when the police arrived. I lunged forward, not at her, but at the weapon. I caught the handle of the skillet just below her grip. The metal was cold and rough. We grappled for a second, two grown women wrestling over a piece of cookware in a silent, deadly tug of war. I looked her dead in the eye. I hissed at her to look at herself. I told her she was wearing my dead mother's apron while trying to bludgeon her daughter. I asked her if she thought the camera would miss the irony. Lana looked down. For a split second, she saw the blue floral fabric. She saw the absurdity and the cruelty of her own image. The shame did not stop her. It fueled her. She let go of the pan with one hand, leaving me holding the heavy weight of it. With her free hand, she drew back and slapped me. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a full-force, open-palm strike across my face. The sound was like a gunshot in the tiled room. My head snapped to the side. The force of the blow sent me staggering back, and this time, I crashed hard into the metal countertop. My hip bone collided with the steel edge, sending a shockwave of pain down my leg. The skillet clattered to the floor with a deafening crash. I stood there, stunned, my hand coming up to my stinging cheek. I could feel the heat rising in my skin where her hand had connected. Lana stood panting, her chest heaving. She looked wild. The mask was completely gone. She raised her hand again, stepping forward to finish what she had started. Ryan was behind her, smirking, pulling out his own phone to record the aftermath, ready to capture my humiliation. But before Lana could strike again, the heavy security door at the very back of the kitchen, the one that led to the delivery alley, swung open with a heavy metallic thud. The sudden draft of cold night air swirled through the hot kitchen, carrying the scent of rain and wet asphalt. A deep baritone voice cut through the chaos. "The camera behind you has recorded quite enough. Lana." Lana froze. Her hand hovered in midair. She spun around. Standing in the doorway was my Uncle Mark. He was dripping wet from the rain, his trench coat dark with moisture, but he was not alone. Standing next to him was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in an impeccable navy suit that seemed out of place in a delivery alley. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a laptop bag in the other. He looked at Lana with the dispassionate, analytical gaze of a shark. Lana stumbled back, her heels slipping on the wet floor. She looked at Mark as if she were seeing a ghost. She stammered his name. She asked what he was doing here. She said she thought he was in Florida. Mark stepped into the kitchen, his boots heavy on the floor. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes locked on Lana. He spoke with a calm that was more terrifying than any shout. He said he had been watching the feed from the van outside for the last 20 minutes. He said they had everything: the setup, the provocation, the lie about the knife, and the assault. He gestured to the man beside him. He introduced him as Mr. Sterling, a forensic asset attorney. Mark told her that Mr. Sterling was there to ensure that when the police arrived, which would be in approximately 3 minutes, the chain of custody for the digital evidence was strictly preserved. He looked at the blue apron tied around her waist. His face tightened with a sorrow that quickly hardened into rage. He told her to take it off. He said she did not deserve to wear the fabric of a woman who knew how to love. Lana looked from Mark to the lawyer, then to the camera blinking above the walk-in, and finally to me. The color drained from her face, leaving the red imprint of her exertions stark against her pale skin. She realized the audience she had curated was not the one that mattered. The real audience had been recording every frame, and the verdict was already being written in the hard drive of the server in my office. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of sirens approaching from the downtown district. The trap had been sprung, but the animal caught inside was not me. The silence that settled over the kitchen after Uncle Mark's intervention led me to believe, foolishly, that the war was won. I thought the sight of the police taking statements and the existence of the security footage would be enough to shame Lana into a retreat. I went home that night exhausted, my cheek still throbbing from her slap, but I slept with the heavy, dreamless sleep of someone who believes the worst is over. I was wrong. The worst had simply changed mediums. I woke up at 7 a.m. to a phone that was vibrating so hard it was dancing across my nightstand. I had 43 missed calls and over 100 text messages. My stomach turned over before I even unlocked the screen. The first message was from my sous chef, terrified. "Chef, you need to look at TikTok right now. It is everywhere." I opened the app with trembling fingers. The algorithm did not make me search for it. It was the very first video on my For You page. It was posted by Ryan. The caption, in bold red letters against a black background, read, "When you spend your life building a business for your family and your ungrateful stepsister physically attacks your mom. The truth about Willow and Ember." I pressed play. The video was a masterpiece of manipulation. It was only 12 seconds long. Ryan had edited the footage from his phone, cropping the frame tight, You could not see the cast-iron skillet in Lana's hand. You could not see her cornering me. You could not hear the audio of her threats. All you could see was me lunging forward. You saw my hand grabbing her wrist aggressively. You saw Lana flinch, her face a portrait of terror. And then you saw the aftermath. Lana holding her cheek, weeping, while I stood over her looking furious. The video cut to black just before Uncle Mark entered. I scrolled to the comments. There were thousands of them. Boycott this place immediately. Imagine hitting the woman who raised you. I heard she stole the seed money from her stepmom too. Rich kids are the worst. Hope she goes to jail. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I switched apps to Facebook. Lana had been busy. She had posted a status update at 3 a.m. It was a wall of text, accompanied by a selfie of her sitting in an urgent care waiting room, holding an ice pack to her face, an injury I knew for a fact I had not caused. The post was written in her signature, aggrieved saint voice. She wrote that her heart was shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She claimed that for 10 years, she had poured her love, her prayers, and her family's life savings into helping her husband's daughter achieve her dreams. She said she had gone to the restaurant to celebrate a family milestone, only to be met with violence and hatred when she asked for a simple acknowledgement of the family's contribution. She did not name me directly, but she tagged Willow and Ember. She ended the post with a Bible verse about forgiveness, implying that she was praying for my soul even as I supposedly abused her. The local reaction was instant and radioactive. By 9 o'clock, a popular local business blog, the Riverton Scoop, ran a headline, "Family Feud or Corporate Greed? Willow and Ember owner accused of assaulting investor stepmother." The article quoted sources close to the family, undoubtedly Ryan, claiming that the dispute arose because I was trying to force Lana out of the business she had co-founded. My phone rang again. It was not a troll. It was my produce supplier, a man I had worked with for 5 years. He sounded awkward. He said he had seen the news. He said he knew me, and he wanted to believe me. But his partners were nervous. He told me that starting today, all deliveries would have to be cash on delivery. No more net 30 terms. I tried to explain, but he cut me off. He said he could not take the risk of the business going under due to a legal battle. I hung up, feeling the walls closing in. Cash on delivery would drain my operating capital in 2 weeks. Then the bank called. It was the relationship manager at the regional bank where Summit Hearth Group held its primary accounts and line of credit. His voice was professional, cold, and devastating. He informed me that the bank had received a formal notification of a material dispute regarding ownership from a legal representative of Mrs. Lana Ellison. He said that because Lana was claiming to be a silent partner and alleging misappropriation of funds, the bank's risk department had triggered an automatic freeze on my revolving line of credit. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I told him that I was the sole owner. I told him I had the documents. He said he understood, but until the dispute was resolved or a court order stated otherwise, the bank had to protect its assets. He advised me to get a lawyer. I slammed the phone down and screamed. It was a guttural sound of pure frustration. They were choking me. They knew they could not win a fair fight in court with the evidence I had, so they were starving me out before we even got to a judge. An hour later, a courier arrived at my apartment door. He handed me a thick envelope from the law offices of Thompson, Miller and Associates. I tore it open. It was a demand letter signed by Arthur Thompson, Lana's lawyer. The letter was a work of fiction. It stated that Lana Ellison had entered into a verbal and implied partnership with me 7 years ago. It cited the goodwill, the consulting, and the initial capital injection as proof of her 50% equity stake. Then came the threat. The letter stated that Mrs. Ellison was willing to forgo a public trial to protect the reputation of the family business. She proposed a settlement. If I agreed to transfer 40% of Summit Hearth Group to the Ellison Family Trust, controlled by her, and paid a one-time consulting fee of $150,000, she would drop all claims and issue a public statement clearing my name. It was extortion, pure and simple. I called Uncle Mark. He He was already at the office of Mr. Sterling, the forensic asset attorney he had brought to the kitchen the night before. I put them on speakerphone. Sterling's voice was calm, a sharp contrast to my panic. He told me not to answer that letter. He said this was standard shock and awe tactics. He explained that Thompson knew their case was weak on facts, so they were trying to break me psychologically. They wanted me to panic and sign a settlement just to stop the bleeding on social media. Mark chimed in. He sounded furious. He told me that if I gave her 1 inch, she would take the whole mile. He said we needed to hit back with the truth. I spent the next 4 hours turning my living room into a war room. I pulled every file from my safe. I scanned the termination of financial interest document Lana had signed 5 years ago. I scanned the bank transfer receipt showing the payoff of $15,000 plus interest. I downloaded the Articles of Organization from the Secretary of State's website, which listed Harper Ellison as the one and only member. I pulled the cash flow statements for the last 7 years, highlighting every single capital injection. They were all from me, or from the 2 silent investors I had bought out years ago. There was not a single deposit from Lana, my father, or Ryan. We were building a dossier that was bulletproof. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I was ready to leak this to the press. I was ready to post the unedited security footage of her slapping me. But Lana was faster. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my email pinged with a notification from the county court system. It was not a threat letter this time. It was a filing. Lana Ellison versus Harper Ellison and Summit Hearth Group, LLC. I opened the document, my breath catching in my throat. She had actually done it. She had filed a lawsuit. The complaint accused me of breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of partnership assets, and elder abuse. She claimed that I had taken her money, used her expertise to build the brand, and then fraudulently maneuvered to remove her name from the paperwork when her husband, my father, was in declining health. It was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. But the real knife in the ribs was the motion attached to the lawsuit. It was an ex parte application for a temporary restraining order on assets. She was asking the judge to freeze all assets of Summit Hearth Group immediately. She was asking the court to appoint a temporary receiver to manage the restaurant's finances until the trial, claiming that I was erratic and likely to embezzle the company funds to flee the state. If the judge granted this, I would lose control of my own bank accounts by Monday morning. I would not be able to pay my staff. I would not be able to buy food. Willow and Ember would be dead in the water within a week. I sat on the floor, surrounded by piles of paper that proved I was right. Realizing that being right might not be enough. The legal system was a machine, and Lana had just thrown a wrench into the gears that could grind me to dust before I ever got a chance to speak. I looked at the text message from Ryan that had just come through. It was a link to his TikTok video, which now had 2 million views. Underneath the link, he had typed just 3 words: "Checkmate, Big Sister." I looked up at the clock. It was Friday evening. The courts were closed for the weekend. I had 48 hours to figure out how to stop them from seizing my life's work on Monday morning. I picked up the phone to call Mark back, my hand shaking not from fear, but from a cold, crystallized realization. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was a hostile takeover, and they were willing to burn everything I loved to the ground just to rule over the ashes. The coffee shop Mark chose was a small, unassuming place on the outskirts of Riverton, far away from the prying eyes of the downtown lunch crowd and the gossip circles that were currently dissecting my life. I sat in the corner booth, clutching a cup of black coffee, my phone face down on the table. My lawyer was currently fighting a war on 3 fronts: the bank, the press, and the looming court filing. But Mark had insisted we meet alone. He said he had something that could not be emailed. He walked in 10 minutes late, carrying a battered metal biscuit tin under his arm. It was rusted at the corners, the kind of object you find in the back of a pantry and ignore for 20 years. But when he placed it on the table between us, he handled it with the reverence of a bomb disposal expert. He sat down and looked at me. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He told me that my mother, Rachel, had given him this tin 3 weeks before she passed away. He said she had made him promise not to open it, and certainly not to give it to me, unless I was in a situation where I had no other options. He said she was specific. She had said, "Give it to Harper only when she needs to know she is not alone in the room with them." I stared at the tin. The lid was taped shut with yellowing masking tape. I peeled it back, the sound loud in the quiet shop. Inside were papers, not typed legal documents, but pages torn from a spiral notebook, covered in my mother's looping, energetic handwriting, and at the bottom, a bank book. I picked up the first document. It was a handwritten will. It was dated 1999, 2 years before she died. It was notarized. I recognized the stamp of the old notary public who used to work at the pharmacy down the street from our childhood home. I read the words, my vision blurring. Rachel had written that she was leaving her personal effects, her jewelry, and her savings to me. But then, there was a paragraph that made my breath catch. She wrote that she specifically bequeathed all her culinary journals, her recipe developments, and any intellectual property derived from her teaching to her daughter, Harper Ellison. She wrote that should her husband remarry, these assets were to remain the sole, separate property of her daughter and were never to be considered part of any future marital community or family trust. She knew. Even back then, she knew. I looked up at Mark. He nodded grimly. He handed me a stack of envelopes. They were letters Rachel had written to him during her chemotherapy. I opened one. Her voice came through the paper so clearly it was like she was sitting next to me. "Mark," she wrote, "Lana came by again today to bring a casserole. She spent the whole time asking about the catering contacts I made last year. She asked if I had written down the formula for the spice blend. It wasn't a neighborly question. She looked at my recipe binder the way a developer looks at a vacant lot. I have a bad feeling. Mark, if I don't make it, she's going to try to wear my life like a costume. Don't let her take the credit for the things I built for Harper." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Hot and angry. Lana had been plotting this takeover before my mother's body was even cold. She had not just been a supportive stepmother who turned greedy. She had been a vulture circling a dying woman, waiting to pick the bones clean. Mark tapped the table, bringing me back to the present. He pointed to the small blue bank book at the bottom of the tin. He explained that Rachel had been squirreling away money for years. Every time she catered a small party or sold a batch of her famous preserves, she put the cash into a separate account. She did not trust the joint account with my father because he was already starting to listen to Lana's investment advice back then. Mark told me that after the funeral, he took that money and put it into a low-risk trust fund in my name. He said he never told me because he wanted it to grow. He opened the book to the last entry. The balance was not a fortune. It was roughly $22,000. But the amount did not matter. What mattered was the date of the transfer. Mark looked me in the eye. He said that this money, combined with my own savings from the diner job, was the actual seed money for my first catering license. He said we could prove, with a forensic accountant, that the family capital Lana claimed to have provided was actually just a personal loan that I paid back, whereas the foundational equity came from my mother's legacy. It destroyed Lana's entire narrative. She was not the financial bedrock of Willow and Ember. She was just a creditor I had paid off years ago. But Mark was not done. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He told me that the man he brought to the kitchen last night, Mr. Sterling, was not just there to look scary. He said that while Lana was screaming and throwing her tantrum, Sterling had wirelessly pulled the entire security logs from my server, both the front of house and the back of house, and uploaded them to a third-party cloud server that Lana's lawyers could not touch. He said they had footage of Lana arriving an hour early. They had footage of her trying to guess the code to my office. They had footage of her practicing her crying face in the reflection of the oven door before I even walked into the room. Mark said that Lana could try to delete the footage on the hard drive in the restaurant or claim the system malfunctioned, but it would not matter. We had the master copy. We had the chain of custody. Then he pulled out his own phone. He looked angry now, a cold, simmering rage that I had never seen in him. He asked if I remembered the family group call from 3 months ago, the one where we were discussing the details for my father's birthday party. I nodded. It had been a chaotic conference call. Mark said that Lana had forgotten to hang up. He said everyone else dropped off the line, but he had stayed on because he was driving and his phone was in his pocket. He realized the line was open when he heard her talking to someone in the background. He pressed play on a voice memo file. The audio was slightly muffled, but Lana's voice was unmistakable. "Thompson, stop worrying about the contract details," she said on the recording. "We do not need to win in court. I know the paperwork is weak. That is not the point. We just need to make it messy enough that she gets scared. If we threaten to drag her reputation through the mud, she will settle. She is weak. She cares too much about what people think. Just file the motion. Once she sees the bad press, she will sign over 40% just to make it stop." I sat there, frozen. The sounds of the coffee shop faded away. It was not just a property dispute. It was malicious prosecution. It was extortion. She had admitted, on tape, that she knew her claim was baseless and that she was using the legal system as a weapon to inflict pain until I paid a ransom. Mark turned off the recording. He told me that in the state of Riverton, as long as one party on the line does not disconnect, the line is considered open. He said his lawyer had already verified it. This recording was admissible. He looked at me, his expression softening. He said he had stayed away all these years because he knew that if he intervened too early, they would just paint him as the bitter brother-in-law. He said he had to wait until they overplayed their hand. He had to wait until Lana felt safe enough to take the mask off. He touched the tin box. He said my mother always knew I was a fighter, but she also knew that even fighters need a shield. This box was the shield. I ran my hand over the rough metal of the tin. I thought about the apron. I thought about how violated I felt when I saw it tied around Lana's waist. I had felt like I lost the last piece of my mother that night. But I was wrong. The apron was just cloth. This, the foresight, the protection, the truth written in fading ink, this was my mother. She had been playing a long game against Lana from beyond the grave for 20 years. I looked up at Mark. I felt a shift inside me. The panic that had been strangling me for 48 hours evaporated. In its place was something cold and hard. I told Mark to call Mr. Sterling. I told him we were not going to settle. We were not going to negotiate. I picked up the handwritten will. I told him we were going to file a countersuit. We were going to sue her for defamation, for abuse of process, for fraud, and for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. I told him I wanted to send the recording to Thompson first. I wanted Lana's lawyer to hear his client admitting to a crime before we even stepped into a courtroom. Mark smiled. It was a grim, dangerous smile. He said he had already drafted the email. I stood up, taking the tin box. I walked out of that coffee shop not as the victim of a family tragedy, but as the CEO of a company that was about to acquire a lot of leverage. Lana wanted a show. She wanted a public spectacle. I was going to give her one, but she wasn't going to be the star. She was going to be the defendant. The Riverton District Courthouse was a building designed to intimidate, with its towering marble columns and echoing rotunda. But the circus outside was entirely modern. Because of the viral nature of Ryan's TikTok video and Lana's Facebook posts, a small army of local reporters and a few independent bloggers had gathered on the steps. When Lana arrived, she paused for them. She was wearing a modest, pale gray suit that made her look smaller, frailer. She clutched a handkerchief to her chest, playing the role of the discarded matriarch to perfection. I walked past them without stopping. I wore a sharp navy blazer and kept my eyes forward, ignoring the questions shouted about whether I hated my family or if I planned to settle. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, walked beside me, his presence a wall of silence against the noise. Inside courtroom 4, the air was stale and smelled of floor wax and tension. Lana sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Arthur Thompson and Ryan. She refused to look at me. She kept her head bowed, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes for the benefit of the few spectators allowed in the gallery. The hearing began with Thompson. He was a theatrical man, the kind of lawyer who treated a preliminary injunction hearing like the closing argument of a murder trial. He paced before the judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson who looked like she had absolutely no patience for melodrama. Thompson painted a picture of a family betrayal of Shakespearean proportions. He claimed that Willow and Ember was the physical manifestation of a joint family dream. He spoke of the seed capital Lana had provided when no bank would touch me. He produced the old, voided loan agreement from 7 years ago, waving it in the air. He talked about the sweat equity Lana had invested, citing her social media posts and the article in Riverton Pallet as proof that she was publicly recognized as a co-founder. He called Lana to the stand. She moved slowly, trembling as she took the oath. Under Thompson's gentle questioning, she wept. She told the court that she had loved me like her own daughter. She said she had given me $15,000, her nest egg, she called it, because she believed in my talent when my own father was skeptical. She claimed that we had a verbal agreement that the restaurant would be a 50-50 partnership, a legacy for the whole family to share. She said she was heartbroken, not angry, that I had physically assaulted her when she simply asked to formalize the paperwork. It was a compelling performance. If I did not know the truth, I might have believed her. Then it was Mr. Sterling's turn. He did not pace. He did not shout. He walked to the podium with a single binder and adjusted his glasses. He asked the court to turn its attention to Defense Exhibit A. On the large monitor mounted on the wall, a document appeared. It was the release of liability and termination of financial interest form. Sterling asked Lana to identify the signature at the bottom. She hesitated, squinting at the screen. She admitted it looked like her signature. Sterling read the clause aloud. It stated clearly that the lender, Lana Ellison, acknowledged receipt of $17,000, representing the principal of $15,000 plus $2,000 in interest, and thereby relinquished any and all future claims, equity, or interest in Summit Hearth Group LLC or its subsidiaries. The date on the document was 5 years ago. Sterling asked her if she recalled signing this. Lana stammered. She said she signed a lot of papers for me because she trusted me. She said I must have slipped it in with other things. She tried to pivot, claiming that paper did not erase the spiritual agreement we had as a family. Sterling ignored the emotional plea and moved to the next exhibit. He showed the bank transfer receipt from my account to hers, matching the date and the amount exactly. He then addressed the judge. He stated that the plaintiff's claim of financial ownership was factually and legally void. The debt was paid. The contract was closed. Thompson tried to object, arguing that the goodwill of the business was built on Lana's reputation, but Judge Patterson silenced him with a raised hand. She asked Sterling to proceed. Sterling nodded and said that since the plaintiff had made the issue of conduct and assault a central part of her claim for damages, the defense wished to submit the full, unedited security footage from the night in question. Lana went stiff in the witness box. Ryan, sitting at the table, suddenly looked very interested in his shoes. Sterling pressed a button. The courtroom fell silent as the video played. It was high definition, and the audio was crystal clear. The screen showed Lana and Ryan cornering me. It showed Lana screaming insults, her face twisted in rage, a stark contrast to the weeping woman currently on the stand. But what sucked the air out of the room was the image of her attire. On the large screen, everyone could see Lana wearing the faded blue floral apron, my mother's apron. The video played on. The judge watched intently as Lana grabbed the cast iron skillet. She watched as Lana feigned fear, screaming about a knife that did not exist. She watched as I stood with my hands open, backing away. And then came the moment. The judge leaned forward as, on screen, Lana slapped me across the face with a force that seemed to echo in the courtroom. Sterling paused the video right at that frame. The image of Lana, arm extended, face contorted in malice, wearing the apron of the woman whose memory she was desecrating, was frozen on the monitor. Sterling asked Lana if that was the heartbroken mother she had described earlier. Lana was silent. Her face had drained of all color. Sterling then played the rest of the clip. The judge watched as Uncle Mark entered. She heard his voice clearly warning Lana about the evidence. Thompson tried to argue that the video was prejudicial, that it showed a moment of extreme emotional distress caused by my provocation. Sterling did not even look at him. He called his first witness. Uncle Mark took the stand. He looked like a man made of granite. He swore the oath and sat down, staring directly at Lana. Sterling asked him about his relationship to the family. Mark explained that he was Rachel's brother. He explained the significance of the apron Lana was wearing in the video. Then, Sterling asked him about the phone call. Mark explained that 3 months ago, he had remained on a line after a family group call had ended. He stated he had recorded the subsequent conversation because he was concerned about the legality of what he was hearing. Sterling played the audio file. Lana's voice filled the courtroom, tinny but undeniable. "We do not need to win entirely. Just make her fear for her reputation. She will settle if we threaten to expose her. She is weak." The gasps from the gallery were audible. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously. Judge Patterson's expression hardened into something terrifying. She looked from the speaker to Lana. Lana tried to speak, to say it was taken out of context, but the words died in her throat. Mark then produced the tin box. He explained the contents to the court. He showed the judge the handwritten will of Rachel Ellison, notarized 20 years ago, explicitly stating that her culinary legacy was to remain my separate property. He showed the passbook for the trust fund. Sterling called a forensic accountant to the stand as his final witness. The accountant was a dry, clinical man who specialized in destroying vague stories with hard numbers. He presented a flowchart of every dollar that had ever entered the accounts of Summit Hearth Group. He traced the initial deposit to the trust fund Mark had established. He traced the subsequent investments to my personal savings and the 2 silent investors I had bought out. He stated unequivocally that apart from the personal loan which was repaid in full, not 1 single cent of capital had ever come from Lana Ellison, Ryan Ellison, or my father. He concluded that the family capital Lana spoke of was a mathematical fiction. When the accountant stepped down, the room felt different. The tension was gone, replaced by the cold, sterile reality of the truth. Lana sat in the witness box, looking small and defeated. Her narrative had been dismantled. Brick by brick, the shared dream was exposed as a lie. The financial support was exposed as a loan. The victimhood was exposed as a calculated assault. Sterling stood up one last time. He looked at the judge and said that the defense rested. He said that what we had seen today was not a property dispute. He said it was an attempt to use the judicial system as an instrument of extortion. He asked the court to dismiss the plaintiff's claims with prejudice and to consider sanctions for the filing of a frivolous lawsuit. Judge Patterson looked at Lana. Her voice was ice cold when she spoke. She asked Lana if she had any explanation for the discrepancy between her sworn affidavit and the video evidence the court had just viewed. Lana opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Ryan, but he was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. She looked at Thompson, but he was busy shuffling papers, already distancing himself from the disaster. For the first time since this nightmare began, Lana Ellison was completely, utterly alone. The apron she had stolen to mock me had become the rope she used to hang herself in the court of public opinion. And as I looked at her, I felt the weight of the last 7 years lift off my shoulders. The ghost of my mother was in the room, and she had finally finished the fight she started 20 years ago. Judge Patterson did not rush. She adjusted the reading glasses perched on her nose and looked down at the pile of evidence that had systematically dismantled the Ellison family myth. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic scratching of pens on legal pads from the press gallery. She began to read her summary, and her voice was devoid of the theatricality that Arthur Thompson had brought to the proceedings. She listed the facts with brutal efficiency. She cited the forensic accounting report that proved every cent of capital in Summit Hearth Group came from my own labor or the trust my mother left me. She cited the notarized will of Rachel Ellison, which explicitly excluded her culinary legacy from marital property. She cited the termination of interest document Lana had signed 5 years ago. But then she paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the transcript of the phone call Uncle Mark had recorded. She stated that while property disputes were common, what she saw here was something far more malignant. She said the audio recording, combined with the staged video provocation in the kitchen, demonstrated a clear and malicious intent to abuse the legal system. She said it was evident that Lana Ellison and her counsel had filed this suit not to resolve a legitimate grievance, but to exert pressure through reputational damage. She looked directly at Lana. She declared that the plaintiff's claims were dismissed in their entirety. She affirmed that Summit Hearth Group LLC and the entity doing business as Willow and Ember were the sole, exclusive property of Harper Ellison. She stated for the record that neither Lana Ellison nor Ryan Ellison held any equitable, financial, or spiritual interest in the business. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was over. But Judge Patterson was not finished. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. She ruled that due to the frivolous nature of the suit and the evidence of bad faith, Lana Ellison was ordered to pay 100% of my legal fees. Then came the hammer blow. The judge stated that during the proceedings, Lana had sworn under oath that she had contributed tens of thousands of dollars of family money to the business. Since the forensic audit showed no such transfers, the court was forced to conclude that either Lana had perjured herself in her affidavit or she had been hiding unreported income in previous years. Therefore, she was referring the entire case file, including the financial discrepancies and the video evidence of the assault, to the district attorney's office for an investigation into perjury, filing a false instrument, and potential tax evasion. The silence in the room shattered. Lana shot up from her chair. The frail, weeping grandmother act evaporated instantly. She screamed that the judge did not understand. She yelled that this was about family, about blood, about the love she had poured into me. But every word she screamed only dug her grave deeper. The venom in her voice matched the woman in the video, not the victim on the stand. I watched as Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bob, who had been sitting behind her in a show of solidarity, looked down at their laps, their faces burning with shame. They shifted in their seats, physically leaning away from her as if her desperation was contagious. Ryan stood up, grabbing his backpack, trying to slide out of the row to escape the scene, but Arthur Thompson, whose face had gone pale, reached out and grabbed his arm. I heard him whisper harshly. He told Ryan to sit down. He said that if the district attorney was getting involved, Ryan needed to worry about the $50,000 he had raised on GoFundMe for the Ellison family studio, based on assets he did not own. He warned him that leaving now would look like flight. Ryan slumped back into his seat, the color draining from his face as he realized the fire his mother started was going to burn him too. I did not look at them again. I stood up, shook Mr. Sterling's hand, and walked out of the courtroom. The double doors swung open, and the flashbulbs blinded me. The reporters, who had smelled blood in the water, surged forward. They shoved microphones in my face, shouting over one another. One reporter from the local news station pushed to the front. He asked if, now that I had won, I planned to forgive my stepmother. He asked if I could find it in my heart to see this as a tragic family misunderstanding. I stopped. I looked directly into the camera lens. I thought about the bruises on my arm. I thought about the years of manipulation. I thought about my mother's apron tied around Lana's waist. I spoke clearly. I told them that this was not a misunderstanding. I said it was a calculated conspiracy to steal the life I had built with my own hands. I said that forgiveness was for mistakes, not for malice. I told them that the court had spoken, and the truth was now a matter of public record. I pushed past them and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, free. That evening, I drove to Willow and Ember. The restaurant was closed for the night. I had given the staff the day off, unsure of what the verdict would be. The space was dark and quiet, smelling of polished wood and lingering spices. I walked into the kitchen. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed in the light of the street lamps outside. I went to the manager's office and opened the safe. Inside, in a new archival bag I had purchased, was the blue floral apron. I took it out. I ran my fingers over the fabric. It still had the faint, old stains from tomato sauce and chocolate that my mother and I had made together 20 years ago. Lana's perfume was gone, washed away by the professional cleaners I had hired immediately after the police returned it to me. I walked into the dry storage room. I took the apron and hung it back on its hook, high up on the wall where it overlooked the entire kitchen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small brass plaque I had ordered 3 days ago, hoping I would get the chance to use it. I screwed it into the wall beneath the hook. It read, "The Rachel Ellison Memorial Apron, do not use." It was not just a rule for the staff. It was a reminder for me. It was the physical manifestation of the boundary I had finally learned to draw. The memories were mine. The legacy was mine, and no one would ever be allowed to co-opt them again. The back door opened, and Uncle Mark walked in. He was holding a manila envelope. He walked over to the bar where I was standing and placed a photocopy of the official judgment on the counter. He looked at me, his face tired but peaceful. He asked me what I thought I would do next. I looked around the restaurant. It was no longer a battlefield. It was just a building, filled with potential and the ghost of good food. I smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached my eyes. I told him I was going to do exactly what my mother taught me. I said I was going to cook. I was going to make food for the people who actually respected me, for the customers who came for the flavors, not the drama. I looked toward the kitchen, where the red light of the new security camera system glowed steadily in the dark corner. I told him that I would feed the people who loved me, and if anyone else tried to touch what belonged to me, the law would speak for me again. Mark nodded, squeezed my shoulder, and walked out into the night. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. It was not the lonely silence of my childhood. It was the peaceful silence of ownership. I walked to the front of the house and began flipping the switches. The dining room went dark. The bar lights faded. Finally, I turned off the main overheads, leaving only the warm, amber safety light glowing in the kitchen, casting a long shadow over the blue apron hanging on the wall. I stepped out the front door and pulled it shut. I took the key, my key, and turned the lock. The bolt slid home with a heavy, definitive click. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a door closing on the guilt, the obligation, and the manipulation. I did not look back. There was no need. The story was written, the verdict was in, and the future was entirely, gloriously mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment down below letting me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done in Harper's situation. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Your support means the world to us.